Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something really interesting. You shared this diary entry from Rodri, April 21st, 2025.
Yeah, it's quite compelling.
It really is. It
Yeah.
takes this specific, powerful story from the Bible, Numbers 14, and applies it in ways that feel super relevant now. You mentioned being interested in how faith and just sheer perseverance work when we hit obstacles, right? Personal stuff, work, even like community issues.
Absolutely. Rodri's entry really focuses on a morning prayer session they had, centered on that story of the 12 spies going into Canaan.
Right, the spies.
And, 10 of them came back with this really discouraging report, all about how strong the people there were, how impossible it all seemed. Rodri really points out how that just unleashed this wave of fear, made the Israelites doubt Moses, doubt Aaron, and, ultimately doubt God's whole plan.
Okay, so let's dig into that. What Rodri seems to be highlighting is this clash, right?
Yeah.
Between seeing these huge, scary problems and holding on to faith anyway. It shows how easy it is to get stuck looking at the roadblocks, the negatives, instead of, the promise or the potential upside.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. To kind of pull apart Rodri's reflections here, look at that fear versus faith thing, the danger of focusing only on obstacles, and find some practical takeaways for keeping belief alive when things feel daunting. Like those challenges Rodri mentions affecting their own spiritual group, busy life, instability, even economic market fluctuations.
Yeah, and Rodri really grounds the whole reflection in specific verses from Numbers 14. Verses 8 and 9 are key. They offer such a different viewpoint than the fear-based one.
Okay, what do they say?
Rodri highlights this part. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them.
Wow. Okay, so that first bit jumps out. If the Lord delights in us, it's conditional.
Right.
It's not automatic. Rodri seems to stress that getting to the good place depends on God's favor, yes, but also on their response. Whether they trust, whether they don't rebel, or give in to fear.
Precisely. It sets up why the report from those other 10 spies was so destructive.
How so?
Well, Rodri digs into how those 10 got completely fixated on the giant enemies as they saw them. Their report wasn't just facts. Rodri sees it as shaded by their own lack of faith. They made the challenges seem, bigger than life, insurmountable.
And that just spread like wildfire, didn't it?
Instantly, Rodri notes the entire Israelite congregation lost faith. Just like that.
You can almost picture it. Rodri describes this loud outcry and weeping throughout the night. It's not just being bummed out. It's like total loss of peace, total despair. Their view gets totally distorted, doesn't it? They forget the milk and honey and only see the scary bits. Makes you think how often we do that, right? Big problem shows up, and suddenly that's all we see. We forget solutions, forget past wins.
Exactly. And Rodri connects the ancient panic to how we feel now when we're overwhelmed. Huge project, tough relationship. It's easy to lose sight of the goal or even how to get there.
And it can spiral downwards fast.
Which leads right into their rebellion, their complaints. Rodri really hits hard on how their fear turned into, direct attacks on Moses and Aaron.
Yeah, they said what? Something like, we wish we died in Egypt or the desert.
Right. Rodri quotes that exact line. It's shocking. They're basically saying slavery or the wilderness was better than facing this unknown challenge.
It's that weird human thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the tough past seems safer than a scary future.
And Rodri's insight here is key. These weren't just complaints about leaders. Rodri frames it as pushback against God himself, since he appointed Moses and Aaron.
Oh, okay.
Their whole outlook turned negative. They convinced themselves they were doomed to die fighting the Canaanites. And so, in their fear, they started almost, romanticizing Egypt's the worldly past, or even the desert they were currently in.
And then they questioned God directly.
Oh, yeah. Rodri includes their words. Why has the Lord brought us to that land? To fall by the sword. Our wives and children will be taken captive. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? It's a total flip from their earlier hope.
They're basically accusing God of setting them up to fail. Horribly.
Exactly. And Rodri interprets this brilliantly, I think, explaining how Satan, through their fear and unbelief, twisted God's promise into what felt like a curse.
Wow.
So naturally, they want to ditch the whole plan and go back to Egypt, back to what they knew, even if it was bad. It just shows how much our emotions can warp our reality.
And they didn't just talk about it, did they? They actually tried to do something.
Right. Rodri points out their decision. Let us appoint a leader and go back to Egypt. That's not just grumbling anymore.
No, that's action.
It's a direct rejection, Rodri says, of God's chosen leaders, Moses and Aaron, a real attempt to derail God's plan.
So faced with this mutiny, basically, what did Moses and Aaron do?
Rodri describes them falling face down before the entire assembly. You can feel the shock, the horror at this open rebellion, this, well, blasphemy.
Yeah, it's a powerful image. Rodri thinks maybe they were trying to calm things down. Or maybe praying, pleading with God.
Likely both. Trying to stop the chaos and intercede. But, even in all that fear, there were other voices.
Joshua and Caleb.
Yes. The other two spies, a total contrast. Rodri notes they tore their clothes, showing their grief and distress at what was happening.
Right, setting themselves apart immediately.
And then they give their report. The land we explored is an exceedingly good land. They're doubling down on God's original promise. It is fertile, it is abundant.
And they link it back to God's favor, don't they?
Absolutely. Rodri highlights their core message. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land. They understood, Rodri points out, that success wasn't about enemy strength or weakness. It was about God's favor, earned through trusting him, obeying him.
Their whole perspective was different.
Completely. They saw God's authority as supreme. Rodri explains their thinking. If they stayed faithful, God's power would handle the opposition. They weren't blind to the challenges, but they saw them through the lens of God's promises.
And they tackled the fear head on. Rodri quotes the warning, "Only do not rebel, and do not fear the people of the land."
And then that amazing line, "For they are bread for us."
Yeah, what does Rodri make of that? Bread for us.
It's fascinating. Rodri interprets bread as meaning God would turn these enemies, these obstacles, into something they could almost consume, overcome them, gain strength from the process.
Okay, like sustenance.
Exactly. And when they say their protection is removed, Rodri explains this refers to the Canaanites' idols, their false gods. Those offered no real protection against the true God who was with Israel.
So Joshua and Caleb are saying, focus on God's power, not their apparent strength.
Precisely. God is with us, don't be afraid. That was their core message.
But the crowd wasn't having it.
Tragically, no. Rodri describes how the congregation just refused to believe them. They actually wanted to stone Joshua and Caleb.
Stone them, just for offering hope.
Yeah, it shows how deep the fear and unbelief had set in. It had turned violent.
That's intense.
It really is. A stark example of choosing fear. And right then, Rodri notes, divine intervention happens. The glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle, stepping in, essentially, to protect Joshua and Caleb.
Wow. Okay, so that's the ancient story. Powerful stuff. How does Rodri connect this all back to, well, us today in 2025? You said it felt relevant.
Yeah, Rodri makes direct links, parallels between the Israelites staring down those giant enemies and us facing our own struggles, personal life, work, church community, all that stuff you find important.
Right.
Rodri points out how we also tend to fixate on the difficulties, the giants, and that can make us lose faith, maybe want to give up on our values, our spiritual path, like wanting to just quit that huge project or walk away from a difficult relationship.
Yeah, I get that. You see a huge challenge, work project, family drama, community issue, and it feels just overwhelming. Like the Canaanites must have felt to them. And Rodri sees that same urge in us, that desire to return to Egypt.
Exactly. Retreating to old habits may be comfortable, but ultimately unhelpful patterns when things get tough.
Familiar, even if it's not good for us.
Mm-hmm. So Rodri pushes for us to be more like Joshua and Caleb, to consciously choose not to be paralyzed by the fear, but instead to really hold on to the belief that there is a positive path for a kind of promised land in whatever area we're struggling with.
But it's a struggle, right? Rodri acknowledges that.
Oh, definitely. Acknowledges that internal battle, the temptation to complain, let doubt take over, which just creates chaos, doesn't it? The fight often starts in our own head.
And Rodri mentions praying for something specific. A breakthrough anointing.
Yes, to fight that urge to complain, to resist wanting to just retreat. It's about actively picking a mindset of trust, of possibility instead of fear and limitation.
So don't assume the difficulty means God intends harm.
Right. Rodri warns against that trap, thinking challenges mean you're abandoned or headed for disaster. The call is to not ditch your principles, not rely just on yourself, but to trust there's a bigger purpose.
And if you align with that,
then, Rodri suggests, you'll be guided through by sticking to what you believe is right, seeking that inner guidance or favor.
I like how Rodri keeps bringing back that enemies as food idea. It's so counterintuitive.
It really is.
Challenges aren't just scary, they're chances to grow, be resilient, find deeper meaning in overcoming them. And that constant reminder the Lord is with us that seems crucial for building that inner strength, fighting the fear.
Absolutely. And then Rodri gets really specific, applying it all to their own spiritual sharing group.
Okay.
They talk about real current pressures, the busyness and instability of life, recent economic market fluctuations. These aren't ancient history. They're things people feel now.
Things that definitely breed anxiety.
For sure. And the worry is that this anxiety could lead people in the group to fear, to prioritize, worldly Egypt immediate survival stuff over their spiritual practices and support for each other.
So for Rodri, this numbers story is a live issue for their community today.
Exactly. The concern is real. External pressures could pull people away, make them lose focus on their growth and connection.
So what's Rodri's approach?
Commitment. Rodri talks about actively working to strengthen the faith of those feeling shaky through discipleship, encouragement, helping them refocus on their core beliefs, their shared goals, instead of getting swallowed by the anxiety.
To help them reframe the problem.
Yeah. Help them see the current difficulties, these giant enemies, as chances for their faith to actually get stronger, to rely more deeply on their shared values and belief in divine presence. It's about turning that bread metaphor into reality for them.
Okay, so wrapping this up, thinking about Rodri's diary entry, what are the main things that stick with you? For us, for people listening?
Well, I think the big one is that choice we constantly face when things get hard. Do we get crushed by how big the problem looks? Or do we consciously choose to trust the principles, the promises, whatever guides us? The Israelites' story is such a, potent warning about how fear messes with our heads, leads us to doubt, maybe even fight against the very path that could lead to something better.
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? Rodri's encouragement to their group, stay steady, despite the pressure that feels like an invitation to all of us, to look at our own lives and ask, where am I letting fear block out the possibility of my own promised land?
Yeah. And maybe a final thought to chew on. What giant enemies are you facing right now? Is it possible they aren't just threats, but actually opportunities hidden in plain sight?
Opportunities.
Opportunities for strength, for growth, for resilience, if approached differently. With maybe a shift in perspective, a renewed trust in whatever anchors you, could those scary things become your bread? Something to think about after today's deep dive.